It's chemistry and you are watching Chem Science.
In this video, we will learn about what are salts, how are salts formed, and what are the main reactions of acids. So let's first understand what's a salt. A salt is a compound formed when a metal or ammonium ion replaces hydrogen in an acid. Now we have learnt in our earlier video that what are acids. Acids are the substances which can donate hydrogen ions, that is, which can donate protons to another substance. So if the acids have hydrogen into it and this hydrogen is replaced by a metal or an ammonium ion through some reaction or a compound, then the substance formed, that's the product, is named as the salt in chemical terms. For example, if we have hydrogen chloride, that is hydrochloric acid, then the hydrogen is replaced by a metal, for example sodium. So if hydrogen is replaced by sodium, then NaCl, that is sodium chloride, is formed. Or we can say magnesium chloride is formed when the hydrogen is replaced by the metal magnesium. So in short, we can say that when an hydrogen is replaced by a metal, especially in hydrochloric acid, then the salts formed will be chloride salts. Chloride salts in the sense sodium chloride, magnesium chloride, calcium chloride. Such chloride salts will be formed when hydrochloric acid reacts with some metal or metal compounds. If we take another example of sulfuric acid, H2SO4, again if the hydrogen is replaced by another metal, say copper, then copper sulfate will be formed. So you can say that sulfuric acid is going to form the sulfate salts like copper sulfates, magnesium sulfate, calcium sulfate, etc. Similarly, another strong acid, that is a mineral acid, nitric acid, when reacts with some other metal or metal compound, then it's going to form the nitrate salts, as we have seen in the other two acids. So when the hydrogen is replaced, then whatever anion is left in the acid, accordingly the type of salt will be formed. For example, here again hydrogen replaced by calcium, then we can say that calcium nitrate salt will be formed. Now let's take an example of an organic acid, say ethanoic acid. Now in ethanoic acid, if the hydrogen of the ethanoic acid, that is this hydrogen, the hydrogen from the COOH carboxylate group, is replaced by a metal, for example sodium, then the carboxylate group will be forming the salt. So here I write the formula CH3COO Na, that is the hydrogen will be replaced by the metal, and we need to note down that the other hydrogens which are there in the carbon chain will not get affected. So the salts formed will be the carboxylate salts formed here. For example, here if we have ethanoic acid, then the salt formed is sodium ethanoate. So ethanoate salt will be formed. So accordingly the type of acid we have, carboxylic acid we have, accordingly the type of salt will be formed. Ethanoic acid forms ethanoate salt, propanoic acid forms the propanoid salts, etc. Now let's start with the reactions of acid, and the first reaction let's consider is that the metals, many metals reacts with the acid. Now when metals reacts with the acid, the salt in hydrogen gas is formed. Now let's understand how is this formed. For example, the metal magnesium reacts with the acid hydrochloric acid. Then here it says salt and hydrogen gas will be formed. Now how come the salt and hydrogen gas is formed? As we have already learned that in an acid, when acid reacts, the hydrogen is replaced by the metal here. So in our case now magnesium is going to replace the hydrogen. So in that case, now when the magnesium is replaced, magnesium replaces hydrogen, then magnesium chloride will be formed. And then after replacing the hydrogen with the metal, we need to make the formula correctly for the salt. So here the formula of the salt is MgCl2. Now in forming the salt, the chloride of the acid and the metal is used. So what is left now? Only the hydrogen is left that is going to form the hydrogen gas. Now we can see that the reaction is unbalanced. So we can balance the reaction by adding 2 in front of hydrochloric acid to balance it. Let me change the color to balance it so that it is visible properly. So here is the reaction that occurs between the metal and the acid to form the salt and hydrogen gas. Now as we have already seen earlier, the type of the salt depends on the type of the acid used. So here if we have used hydrochloric acid, then the salt formed will be chloride formed. Let's understand the other example where sulfuric acid is reacting with the metal calcium. Again, if hydrogen is replaced by the metal calcium here, then the sulfate salt, that is calcium sulfate, will be formed. Now again, hydrogen is replaced out, so that hydrogen is going to form the hydrogen gas here. And let's have a look at the proper formula of the calcium sulfate. Is that correct? The way we have changed the formula of the salt in the chloride salt earlier with magnesium chloride, we need to check the formula of the salt also. So here calcium sulfate has the same formula of CSO4, so no need to correct it. And let's check the balance also. Now here we can see that the reaction is already balanced, so we don't need to balance it. So this is how a metal reacts with the acid to form the hydrogen gas. Now let's study another reaction of an acid, that is when some acids react with many metal hydroxides, or you can say alkalis, to form then what? Salt and water. So we need to remember that the acids, when react with the metal hydroxides or alkalis, then salt and water is formed. So let's study some examples. For example, now hydrochloric acid again reacts with the metal hydroxide sodium hydroxide, which is again an alkali also. So we can write it aqueous here also. Again, hydrochloric acid is also aqueous because HCl is a gas which is dissolved in water to use it as an aqueous hydrochloric acid. Now again, the reaction is a similar type where the hydrogen will be replaced by the metal. Now here our metal is sodium. So chloride salt, that is sodium chloride, will be formed and the formula is NaCl. Now once this hydrogen is replaced out, what is left after forming the salt is hydrogen itself and the hydroxide part of the alkali. So now if H and OH can form what? Can form water. So that's the reason that when an alkali reacts with the acid, the salt and the water is formed. The type of the salt depends on the type of the acid used. Now if we take another example of nitric acid reacting with the alkali potassium hydroxide, then again the metal here is potassium that will replace the hydrogen from the acid. So what will be the salt form? Nitrate salt will be formed from the nitric acid with the metal potassium. So potassium nitrate will be formed. Let's check the formula. Formula is again correct, KNO3. Now after using up nitrate and metal to form the salt, what is left is hydrogen and hydroxide, again that is going to form the water. So here the nitrate salt and the water is formed because the acid used is nitric acid with the alkali potassium hydroxide. We also need to note down that the ammonia also reacts in a similar way as the alkalis, because as we know that ammonia is a gas, so when we take it in a dissolved form, that's an aqueous ammonia. Now aqueous ammonia, here we are just writing ammonia, we are not considering hydroxide here, so it's going to form the salt NH4Cl, because this ammonia is going to replace hydrogen now in place of the metal. But suppose if we mention the hydroxide of the aqueous ammonia, then we have to add the water. We are not writing hydroxide here, so I'm not showing the water formed. So the salt formed will be the chloride salt with ammonia, that is ammonium chloride. Another reaction of acid is the acids with the metal oxides. Now we know that all the metal oxides are basic in nature. So the metal oxides can react with the acid to neutralize it and form salt and water. Let's take an example of the sulfuric acid reacting with the metal oxide copper oxide. So again, as the metal here is copper, that's going to replace hydrogen. So copper sulfate salt will be formed. Now after using copper metal and the sulfate part of the acid to form the salt, what is left is hydrogen and oxygen. So again here hydrogen and oxygen together is going to form the water. So as a result we get the salt, copper sulfate and water as the products. One more example of a metal oxide reacting with the acid nitric acid we can take here is that nitric acid reacting with magnesium oxide, again which is basic in nature. So magnesium replacing hydrogen from the nitric acid will form magnesium nitrate, and if we check the formula, then we get the formula as magnesium nitrate twice. Again hydrogen and oxygen left over is going to form the water. So nitric acid form the nitrate salt along with the magnesium. So magnesium nitrate product and water as a byproduct are formed. Acids also react with the metal carbonates to form now salt, water and one more product, carbon dioxide. Now let's understand how come the three products are formed. So in this example we have taken sulfuric acid and calcium carbonate as a metal carbonate. Now the salts formed will be the calcium salt, because calcium is going to replace the hydrogen. So calcium sulfate, the formula is correct with CaSO4, no more 2 needed. So calcium sulfate formed. Now what is left after forming the salt from calcium and sulfate part is then hydrogen, carbon and oxygen. Now hydrogen, carbon and oxygen. So hydrogen and oxygen is going to form the water. Still carbon is left, which should form another product. So carbon dioxide is also formed as the third product in this reaction. And if we check the balancing part now, we can see that the reaction is balanced, so we don't need to balance it. Let's study one more reaction of this type with sodium hydrogen carbonate. We can also call it as sodium bicarbonate reacting with the hydrochloric acid. Now if the salt formed with the chloride will be the sodium chloride, where the metal sodium from the sodium hydrogen carbonate will be replacing hydrogen. So now after forming the salt, we are left with hydrogen from both sides, carbon and oxygen. So again water and carbon dioxide will be formed. Let's check the balancing part. I think the reaction is balanced. So let's go ahead with another example, another acid reaction with the carbonate, sodium carbonate, so with the hydrochloric acid again. So here again the salt formed will be sodium chloride, as the sodium is going to replace out the hydrogen. Then the water and the carbon dioxide is formed. Let's check the formula of all these salts. And now if we balance the reaction, then we need to add 2 here to make the sodium balanced. This will unbalance the chloride, so we need to add a 2 here. Now if we check the balancing part, it's Correct. So now here we have studied 5 types of reactions of the acids. That is the acid reacting with the metal hydroxide, that is the alkalis. So acids reacting with the alkalis. Then we can also say that it reacts with a base like metal oxides. We also studied its reaction with the ammonia, and we also studied it with the metal carbonate. So these are the types of reactions we need to study when we are studying the topic acid and base. So these are the chemical properties of the acids.